The title of this class is a little bit different from what I had put in the blurb that was what went out to you. That was just American painting in the 1930s. But as I started to think about it, I saw that that was just a disservice. Now, so that in the 30s, what I'm really considering is from the time of the stock market crash in late 29 till about the beginning of World War II. It was a time of stress, like now. I mean, this is just so extremely appropriate right now, and new technology. And because there was a lot of sponsorship for art through the government being unusually non-prescriptive and really just providing employment for artists, there was an opportunity for artists, although only making $26.30 a month on a government program, to explore and to experiment and express in all sorts of different ways. I'll tell you what I have in mind for the layout of the 5 weeks. And then we have a kind of a meandering way of getting going today. I'm setting the scene today, and then we'll talk about the premier American modernist artist, the most thoroughly and abstract, who worked in a kind of an abstraction. That's Stuart Davis. Then next class, the modern realist painters. That's Edward Hopper, Charles Sheeler, Georgia O'Keeffe, and maybe a few others. The third class would go to the more politically, socially oriented social realists. Ben Shahn, Jacob Lawrence, been covered in another course I did by Mill, but that was only dealing with them in their organic growth rather than by a certain period in their lives. So Ben Shahn, the three Sawyer brothers from Manhattan, Isabel Bishop and Reginald Marsh, and a few other lesser well-known names. And then the fourth class, photography, which really comes into its own as an art form in the 30s. And we'll deal with Dorothy Lang. I imagine most people can bring up, without seeing it, the image she had of the migrant mother with her holding her face in her hand with her children clustered next to her in a kind of a contemporary Madonna portrait. And Berenice Abbott and Walker Evans and Gordon Parks. And then the last class, probably the style that's most identified with the 30s, and that's the regionalist painters. That'll be Grant Wood and Thomas Hart Benton. I saved them for last because, well, that's keeping it going. And also because Thomas Hart Benton's student was Jackson Pollock, which is a neat segue into the post-war abstract expressionist mode of art. But to show you how different everything was simultaneously, show you a couple things from 1930. Who doesn't know this, right? It's Edward Hopper's painting, titled not by him as early, just the early Sunday morning. He was just going to call it 7th Avenue Shops. Now, Edward Hopper, whose style, he always follows his own lodestar, and his style essentially evolves along his own path throughout his career, so it doesn't move with the currents of the time. But people look at him as an exemplar of the mood of isolation and solitude and retrospection that comes in. And this painting was bought right away, and he was very successful. This is bought by the Whitney, and he showed in every single Whitney exhibition throughout his life. Well, we have this somewhat moody, extraordinarily beautiful, and well, this is like tipping my hat, not very realistic scene. Because if this is 7th Avenue, And this is that strong, slanting morning light. Since when does the sun come up in the north or south? So we have that to think about. Also 1930, this is going to be the hero of today. That's Stuart Davis, the American modernist, who sought always to get to express American consumer, fast-paced, jazz age culture, and was really devoted to making sure that people could understand his work. He never went over the sort of the tipping point into pure abstraction. This is called Summer Landscape, and I'll come back to it in a little while. Who doesn't know what this is? That's also 1930. That's Grant Wood's, he titled it American Gothic. You have all 5 weeks to think about this as you look at the 1,000 knockoffs on this and parodies of this, because this is a painting that still, at that time and still, is one that, it's almost like a Rorschach test. Is Grant Wood, in a sense, ennobling the sturdy, hardworking, no-nonsense Midwestern farmers and their life? Or, as many East Coast people saw in this painting, is he mocking them? Is this a kind of a parody of an ideal of the life? And as I say, the people come down still on both sides of that. And when Grant Wood painted this, it was displayed at the Chicago Art Institute in 1930, and it catapulted him to fame right away. Well, within the 30s, in fact, some sign of the fame of that is that there are 2 other takes on that. This is by Bernarda Bryson, who was Ben Shah's wife, and with him traveled down to the South, sponsored by the government, to document the life of the poor farmers. Here, this is a scene, this is an Arkansas couple. And look how everything, the roof sags, his shirt sags, she bends, there's malaria, chills, fever. I don't know if the 666 there is anything to do with the brand rather than the mark of the beast. And Ben Shah actually did a photograph of the same thing. She did this as a lithograph so that many people would be able to see the struggles of people who were otherwise, they feared, ignored. And Gordon Parks, so this, I did transgress a little. This is the beginning of the 40s. And he did give the subtitle of this to American Gothic. He was working for a federal agency in in Washington, D.C. And one of the cleaning ladies in the farm security building, I think it was, administration building, where he was this woman named Ella Watson, and he did a photo documentary on her life. And in this one, you see he's bringing attention to her labor. It's definitely based on the other, and also giving some attention due in the same way we're talking about now, doing to people who are the indispensable workers who are so often overlooked. So that's mainly 1930. Now, I'm going someplace else. Quite a shift. Because I want to start with the patrons and the sort of, especially since we're in the New York area, the New York ambiance for the development of art in the 1930s. This is Gertrude Vanderbilt Whitney, and the portrait is by Robert Henry, who you would not guess from this, but was in the beginning of the 20th century quite a controversial artist because he primarily painted with a group that were called the Ashcan School because they showed the gritty urban realism of just life as it was. But the important here is, actually, he's the teacher of both Edward Hopper and Stuart Davis, but the importance here is I want to show you Gertrude Vanderbilt Whitney. She was rich and a sculptor, and here's a photograph of her a little bit later. She had a studio down on West 8th Street and in Manhattan. It was the Whitney Studio. She had students, and then she began with her money, and she was, as I think I said already, a sculptor. With her interest in American art, she began to collect the work of modern American artists who couldn't find any venues and couldn't find any patrons. So she used her money to begin to collect works until she amassed about 500 of them. And she offered to give them to the Metropolitan Museum, which refused them. So she decided to found a museum of her own. And the Whitney Museum of American Art was founded in 1929, 1930. Just the area around the doorway here is what survives from that original studio museum. Oh, let's go back here first. While we're looking at this, because this is going to be a story that's not uncommon also. So she is a very au courant woman. Her husband would not allow this painting to be shown in their Fifth Avenue mansion, because he said he didn't want any of his friends to see his wife lounging around in pants. And then, of course, there we have the Whitney now, where many works by Stuart Davis and Edward Hopper are. That's by Renzo Piano. Now, are you seeing, I hope you're seeing the full screen on this. Let's see if I have to, I'm not, move it over a little. There are three women here who are also extremely important in the development. So you have Gertrude founding a museum explicitly for American art, explicitly for modern American art, over the objections of her husband, but she goes ahead and she does it. Then these are three women who were good friends, and they were called the ladies, or the adamantine ladies. The most important one here is the one on the right, Abby Aldrich Rockefeller, the wife of John D. Rockefeller Jr. These three ladies got together and decided there should be another museum, or a museum of modern art that especially includes European modernism, and to introduce that to the West. So they founded the Museum of Modern Art. Abby Aldrich Rockefeller's husband, John D. Rockefeller, would not provide any money for the support because he deplored contemporary art. But these ladies got advice about who to hire as a curator and who to get as largely young help, because it would be younger people who are more interested. The person here on the right is Alfred H. Barr Jr., who was for a long time the chief curator at the Modern. And on the left, that's Philip Johnson, and you know, as an architect who was an avowed modernist and then a postmodernist. But they helped to introduce and proselytized for the most current, especially German Bauhaus design. Philip Johnson later on is the one who invited Mies van der Rohe to come to live in the States. And this was Philip Johnson's apartment, also 1930, with furniture designed by Mies van der Rohe. This is an apartment over on East 52nd Street. And the furniture, well, you'll recognize those chairs. They're the so-called Barcelona chairs, which at the same time were being used by Mises' house in Czechoslovakia, their Brno house, as you see in this gorgeous, gorgeous image. So when the Museum of Modern Art started out, their collection was of a series of prints. I think they had maybe one painting. And they gradually amassed a few. They asked people to lend works, and they moved around from the Heckscher building on 57th and 5th, and then one place and then another place as they got more attention on what they were doing. Until finally here was the first building dedicated for the Museum of Modern Art, built in 1939 by Edward Durrell Stone. Its environment looks a lot different now, doesn't it? But at that time, you can see how much the modern stood out. This sleek, impersonal, geometric facade, all meant to look like machines. That was the ethos of European modernism. Now, Europe, modernism, the machine was really an ideal rather than actuality, because they were still recovering from all the destruction of World War I. So America was machinery personified in an action rather than as an ideal. And that's why some Europeans look to America. So I'm still looping around. Well, we'll get back to Stuart Davis. You know that. That's the Chrysler Building, 1929, 1930. It's a, I don't know, when you look at it overall, it's actually a kind of a, I wouldn't say it's ugly, but it's a little bit graceless as a building when you see it from this angle, but oh, this wonderful spire. And oh, the wonderful decoration on it. Review what probably is known by a lot of you, but it's always worth saying again. When this building was erected, it was the tallest building in the world. And it was this great statement of American progress and American hope and American limitless capacity and the speed of modern motor cars and new transportation and new materials. I mean, a boundless, bounteous future ahead. Well, of course, that's not the way it turned out right then. But the decoration on the top, this would be the style called Art Deco, this strong zigzag style, which is intentionally carrying a kind of a symbolic overtones. It's like the rising sun, and here it's like one of these is emerging from another, from another, from another, like this new growth going up further and further to the sky. And it's this new material of aluminum, so it's light reflecting and sleek as the stereotype, but not the actuality of machinery was. And as was felt still appropriate, a fine building needed to have fine embellishment. And this is some of the decoration partway up. There's a band that goes all the way around with Chrysler hubcaps, and you can see the front there, the view over the front wheel. And then what would be hood ornaments shown there. And only a couple of years later, well, so this story with the Chrysler Building, again, I hope, this is what happens with overweening ambition, right? Pride. The tallest building in the world, well, for a few months, because then came up the Empire State Building, which Van Allen, the architects, thought was surely going to come in lower than this, but then the Empire State Building hoisted a dirigible mooring up through the top, so that the total, of course, no dirigible ever moored up there, but made the top of the building higher than this. So then the next complex, and bringing us, so you saw something that was sort of the expression of the optimism of the age, the lauding of the machinery and speed in the automobile in the Chrysler building. And then here this sort of takes us back more directly to the issue of patronage as well as the arts. The Rockefeller Center, which was built throughout the 30s. So this is what, while Abby was working on the modern, this is what her husband was up to. He owned this whole stretch of property, which was pretty seedy at the time. And he intended this to be the site of a new Metropolitan Opera building. But with the stock market crash, that certainly was put the scotch to that plan. And what Rockefeller did was just pretty amazing. He decided to build something grand and expensive, no expense, no detail spared, thinking that the quality of it would attract tenants even during the dark days of the Depression. It's called a city within a city, and this is the mark of the 30s. So just give you a little bit here from it first. Everybody knows this, right? Just to he wanted art to embellish this. And this is to be art that revives people's spirits. It helps them to hope for the future. It's art with a message, including the gilt bronze statue here by Paul Manship of Prometheus, who brings fire to humanity. So that's the gods bringing the gift of civilization to us. And not too far from that is Lee Lowry's one of Atlas, in bronze, also here holding up the world. So here we are, we're struggling now, but we have the strength in our country and the fortitude and the power to do great things. I thought I'd give you one more from just the end of the time. Some decoration over a door. This is by Isamu Noguchi, who did quite a lot of work in the 30s. This was, the building was originally this is the headquarters of the Associated Press. And this shows 5 reporters eager to get the scoop. If you're hearing me, I have to apologize. I have a cat who doesn't ever like to be ignored. So then we look up now it's only the dimensions, the proportions. This is the modernist view. You don't need applied decoration. The basic form itself is the inherent beauty of the object. But I want to tell you yet a little bit more, still related to patronage. So there you have John D. Rockefeller, an important patron for not just the arts of architecture and sculpture, but for the building trades and just the revival of life in Manhattan in the 30s. Well, he had Diego Rivera and several other of the Mexican muralists were active in the United States in the 30s. And John D. Rockefeller, knowing Diego Rivera's leftist political leanings, commissioned Diego Rivera to do this mural. Well, this is a kind of a Rivera created copy made later on for Mexico City. But this, because of the sad story of what happened to the original, this is called Man at the Crossroads. So again, it's this heroic idea of a man, look at this blonde-haired Teutonic fella, with his hand at the throttle, and these are almost like propellers here, and then you have the grinding turbines and the machinery behind him. All this idea of the potential, the forward movement of the world. And Diego Rivera's idea was that this was going to show on one side capitalism and on the other side communism. And that was okay with Rockefeller. However, there were some leftist newspapers who began to needle Rivera that he was working for a capitalist and he shouldn't be doing that. And then there was a strong rightward leaning paper that created a God almighty stink, because what Rivera did in response to that needling was to introduce the portrait of, I don't know how I can get here's my cursor, right. The portrait of Lenin in there. And he showed a May Day parade up here. Well, this was too much for Rockefeller and for that paper. So Rockefeller told told Rivera, paint that out. Rivera, strong-minded man, also, just not wealthy, but equally strong-minded. No. So Rockefeller had it destroyed. So that is the danger of private patronage. And also means that the artist was in the condition that most artists have been through most of human history, that they're working at the behest of someone else. And in the fact that this was a mural in the 30s is a great age of the murals, because murals are thought of as people's art. They reached, if they're in a church or in a public area, they reached a wide range of people. So they're ideal for getting messages across. I don't know about the ones in Montclair, what they meant. But I was thinking, my son used to live in the south side of Philly, and there certainly those murals are very effective in sort of giving a sense to the vitality of the area. And before here, graffiti art, that was too individualistic. But murals have always had that public ethos involved. Still a little bit more, getting there. Radio City Music Hall was the first part of Rockefeller Center to be completed. The design was by Edward Durrell Stone, who then goes on to do the Museum of Modern Art. And you can see it is typical of so much in the whole center. There are also decorative carved tondos here, and everything has some kind of instructive, ennobling, spirit-lifting message to it. But I guess I should say also before we go on, one thing, just looking at the marquee around here, see the three lines and the way it sweeps around the curve. This is the standard motif. This is the modern style. And those carry the idea of speed and efficiency. That just becomes a kind of a visual shorthand. That you find it on radios, you find it on cars, you find it on locomotives, you find it everywhere. But now we're going to go inside to the lobby, the foyer, which was designed by Donald Desky, who was an industrial designer, and industrial design also became much more important almost as an art form in the 1930s. And Desky, when he did this, said that he intended this to be a palace for the people, to raise everybody's spirits, to help them experience the potential grandeur of their lives. And so what does he do here? Well, he combines sometimes cherry wood and then bakelite and aluminum and fine woods, a whole host of different materials to make this very sumptuous, this grand staircase, and a mural. This is by Ezra Winter. I don't know anything about him. But that, to give you the idea of, this wasn't even just meant to advertise the RCA, but it seems to be well-meaning to shift the feeling of the populace. Desky also designed the apartment in the building for the theatrical impresario at the time. I'll just give you an idea of this art, still mainly Art Deco, but mixed Art Moderne style. It's all part of a complex. So this gleaming surfaces, this sort of faint mechanical quality to it. Desky designed the furniture, the lights, everything in here. So, all right, Margaret, when are you going to get to painting? Well, also in that building, something that I would never see, there is a mural by Stuart Davis. The reason, well, now it's no longer, I don't know, maybe some of you can tell me afterwards in the chat if you've seen this. It was originally in the smoking lounge, men's smoking lounge inside the music hall. It dates from 1932. And it's called Men Without Women. Now that's not a title that Stuart Davis liked. That was a title of a collection of short stories that Ernest Hemingway published in that year, and it was given that title. Because it needed some restoration, you can imagine the smoke and people had pushed chairs up against this. It was given to the Museum of Modern Art and then lent back to the Rockefeller Center. So I'm not sure where it is now. We're going to get to this, but I'm going to now we're going to segue into Stuart Davis. Let me see here. So his lifetimes, he was born in 1892 in Philly. You'd think he was destined to be an artist. His father was an art editor for a newspaper in Philadelphia, and his mother was a sculptress. And when he was young, they moved up to Newark, where his dad also worked for a newspaper. And his family encouraged his interest in art, so that he was even able to leave high school early to go into Manhattan so that he could study with Robert Henry in this new modern, contemporary, prosaic life of the street style, the Ashcan style. Somewhere in my notes, which I might get to find here a little while, I have something from Robert Henry. But here's an early work by him. This is called Newark. It's tiny. He did this when he was in his late teens. It's just a little oil. But you see none of that heroic quality in this. This is just the grime of the city, winter scene, no light except the light that's filtered through the smoke, and no human beings in it either, and just a relatively subdued palette. Well, he did this one called Bleecker Street. This is in 1912, he did this. So he's very much involved, as most of his life, he does urban scenes. He's a city guy, except he spends his summers in Gloucester, Massachusetts, where his family had a place. But what Robert Henry was saying, paint what means something to you. Don't follow the rules of art. Paint what you want, the way you want, and of course he's encouraging this kind of work. Well, Stuart Davis was a very precocious and very good artist who had an exceptional start to his career, because in the following year, 1913, he had 3 of his watercolors exhibited in this show. This is the Armory Show, the cataclysmic event, at least as it's taught now, the cataclysmic event in the development of modern art in America. Because in that exhibition, that was the first large exhibition of works by contemporary European artists, most of them Parisian artists, as well as some Americans. And so for many, it was a time when they saw cheek by jowl what was going on in this country and what was going on in Europe. And for many, it was a shock. And for Stuart Davis, it was a shock. This is one of the paintings he would have seen, Matisse's Blue Nude from a few years earlier, 1907. And one that got a lot of press, Marcel Duchamp's Nude Descending a Staircase. And there was also, I don't know what Picasso, but there were some Picassos. And this is what Picasso was doing at that time, around 1910, 1911. This is a painting in the Met called A Bottle of Rum. But, it may have been an earlier, more proto-Cubist work that Picasso brought in. But, so he was seeing bold color, free exaggeration of form, placing design over the naturalist elements, statement of the artist's sovereignty over the subject matter, or fragmentation of figures, the whole suggestion of speed and movement and things changing before your eyes, and the willingness to, well, I don't know what he wants to say, what he does to the human body, but you can sort of see a human body, and try to show speed and movement, how in something in painting you can do that. So a new challenge in modes of presentation, what you present, and of course, Picasso, a great challenge in how you see, and what a painting can do in presenting what you see at different points all on a single canvas. This is about the same time Picasso did this, give you the exact, I'll give you the title for this. It's just called The Guitar. It's in the Museum of Modern Art from 1913, and it's a collage where you have these flattened forms and just objects from daily life rather than just the representation of daily life as in the subject of the work. Well, upon seeing these things, Stuart Davis really quite rapidly began to move. He planted both his feet firmly in the modernist camp, and he, except for a brief time when he made a trip to Cuba with a friend, he never stirred out of that. Even at the end of his life, when things were moving past him, he is a modernist, working always with abstraction, but never total abstraction. So I'll give you a couple of works from the 20s, and then we get to the 30s. I'm thinking this might be familiar to many of you from the Museum of Modern Art. This painting he did of, this is called Lucky Strike, from 1921. It's not quite 3 feet high. How's that for celebrating modern commercial life? And what he does here also that he'll do always, almost all the time, is include text. And then he flattens it as he will have been absorbing from the Cubists. But he is celebrating just the life of ordinary people. This is back when smoke was fine. And you can see this wasn't a cigarette pack. This is back when you rolled your own. So this is would have been the pouch of full of tobacco. And with this extremely bright colors, and that's characteristic of Stuart Davis throughout, even more than most of the Cubists. And let's see, what did I want to point out here? The shifts are like this curving line, this swinging line, and then the shifting curving line up here, and then this intersecting, and then a circle here, and things bouncing over and under one another. You might get a little sense of something that then is going to get really obvious in a little while, is that what inspired Stuart Davis to this new mode of painting was not just what he was seeing in terms of European abstract or other kinds of modernist art, but was American jazz. He loved jazz. He knew many of the jazz greats, and he also talked about jazz as being the modern American art form. So he was in painting trying to create something that was equivalent in that, in its rhythms and its vitality and its vividness. And frankly, I'm not going to be able to remember which one of these is which of the next few. These are works from the late 20s he did to show how he moved on in this mode of abstraction. He did a series called Egg Beaters. He did 4 paintings, the Egg Beater series, on a table. He kept this over a period of years. He placed an egg beater, a fan, and a rubber glove. And then he made paintings out of them. Now you see how much stronger the color is here and how he breaks it up into shapes that some places suggest 3-dimensional form just because of the way the lines go back and forth, but then this flattens it right out. This could be like a hollow, but no, maybe not. Does this curve? No, maybe yes, maybe not. That's one of them. Here's another one. And here's one he did in 1930, which is actually looks a little bit more realistic than the rest. A little bit more like this. This is work by Brock from that time. So he's keeping up with what's going on in Paris. Now here we are back to this summer landscape from 1930. It's in a private collection. And it's, well, it's almost 4 feet long, so it's a fairly big painting. So it shows a scene up in Gloucester, which he loved. And you kind of get that here. You see the sails and the masts of a couple of ships. Here's a little boat down here. Then these squiggles, almost as if they're water. Of course, that's not meant to be water. Clouds across whatever. Then he'd married just 2 years before. After he sold 2 works to Gertrude Vanderbilt Whitney, he had enough money so he could take his fiancée, and the 2 of them went to Paris and they got married there. And he worked in Paris for a while. And over in this, oh, I gotta find where my cursor went again. Well, anyway, in the middle on the right side there it says Seine Loft, which could be fishing net Seines, and it also could be Seine Paris and a loft. So it may be a recollection of that time. Here it is, over there. Electric light, well, rural electrification was going on in the 30s. So it's as if it's light cast upon the scene. I guess this is the hill here. And then all of this, he painted this frame around it. He makes it look like a stage set, doesn't it? As if you recede into a scene, which then once you get into it is utterly flat. Into a little transformer tower here. So they're bits of American life. And now we're back to Men Without Women. This is big enough, it's over 10 feet. And I want to talk a little more about how he got to do this, but let's look at it first. So he has the intent that a viewer could recognize contemporary life in this could enter into it, could maybe have a emotional context with it, but would definitely identify that this is modern America. This is our changing world. And this is the world of luxury. Here you've got a roadster over here, you've got the gas pump, you've got a cigar, tobacco pouch, pipe, matches, playing cards. I'm figuring this must be some recognizable brand that I don't know what it is. Bird up here, fish right next to it. He gets something in from Gloucester all the time. Another. So he takes advertising images, words, scenes of everyday life, burnt out match, and here's making art out of them. So now, just for a moment, it's like getting back to patronage. This was a mural that he was commissioned to do because of something at the Museum of Modern Art, where there had been an exhibition called Murals by American Painters and Photographers. It was the first show at the Modern, and it was a show where artists were invited to attend, and that all the artists had to come up with murals, a plan for a mural, a panel for the mural, and it was to be on a theme of modern American life. Other than that, the exact subject matter or the style was not specified. The jury made once the people were invited to exhibit, there was no judgment of quality or of theme. It could just be as it was. The purpose of this show, when it was first set up, was so that New York builders and industrialists could see what was possible by artists who now, of course, are needing money, the kind of art they could produce to embellish buildings around the city, either buildings under construction or buildings being envisioned, of course. One of the ones being envisioned and then soon be under construction was the Rockefeller Center. So Davis was one of the 4 artists whose work was in that show, and that led directly to this big public commission. So in these last 5 minutes, I'll show you several other murals, because that is the most public form of art that he did in the 30s. I have neglected to say that one thing about Davis you should know, that he was never a communist, but he was definitely a Marxist socialist, and he was deeply concerned with art for the masses and instructing the masses. And he was deeply concerned throughout the 30s in the plight of artists. He was on everybody's, he was president of this organization, vice president of this organization for unemployed artists, for Artists of America, for this or for that. So he played he was kind of a fulcrum for many artists, not just for this kind of modernist tendency. But this one, this mural, which is now in the Norton Simon Museum, was one that he did. It's just called a New York mural. And what he's representing, well, here's the Empire State Building. These bowler hats, this is to honor Al Smith, who had been 4 times governor of New York and had just recently lost the bid for presidency to, and one of the reasons that Stuart Davis so admired him was that Al Smith was against prohibition. Look up here, here's the moon drinking the champagne. And then you have a gas station down here, urban buildings. This lion's head, I don't know, it's be a lion or a tiger, represents Tammany Hall. So there's a lot of New York theme in that. And then let's see, we do this one, and maybe then we'll just, my time comes to the end with this one. This is called Swing Landscape from 1937, 1938. And I want you to know where this was to go. This one he did. He was one of the first artists who signed up for public support through the Federal Arts Project. He never made much money as an artist. I don't know, maybe his wife, well, seems not to have been that interesting to them. But he got a commission through someone else in the Federal Arts Project to do a mural that was going to go in a basement community room in one of the low-cost housing in Williamsburg, Brooklyn. And this is the painting that he did for it. Oh. There are lobster traps. You can see little bits of, here's again some more vestiges of some boats. You can make out little bits here and there. Maybe this is a little bit of water. And look at the bright color and everything. It's like syncopated rhythm. Everything shifts one to the next, just flat areas of color, one to the next. What's behind, what's in front. And it's essentially a really positive mooded work, which he was always himself quite positive. Let's see. So I'm going to finish another one of his from 1930. This is down on Front Street. As you see. And there's some modern skyscrapers over here. I think you can identify, it's possible to identify exactly where this is. This may refer to Al Smith. This wonderful saturated color, this geometric forms. And you notice these, it's like you swiveled around looking from one vantage point to another here. And the other thing this looks like is 2 frames in a film. And he, like Edward Hopper, that we'll look at next time, were great film buffs. So I'm going to, I've been so punctilious about this. Let's see if I can figure out how to get you all back in here. You're all unmuted. I hope I'll see you next week, but if you have a couple questions, stay on now. There you go, questions.
Maggie, these were all painted?
No, yeah, they're all murals, but well, actually the one that Men Without Women, he wanted to have that made out of linoleum, which would be a new material, but fire department wouldn't let him. But these were all painted murals on canvas. And then they
seem to have the collage-like effect.
Yes, yes, yeah.
I have a question. You had said that the artists were paid. They were given a stipend, I guess.
They were given $26.30 a week.
Okay, when did that stop?
That particular program stopped in 43. So they paid that much, and then whatever organization commissioned it paid for the materials.
Because our artists are not paid at all. None of the artists. From the government.
This is part, I will talk later more about FDR in particular, was very concerned with that this is a part of the segment of society, that they need to find a source of support.
Right. Because I didn't realize Europe, a lot of the countries there pay artists to perform, to do their work.
Yeah.
We don't appreciate them.
So they did it in the 30s, but that's about it. Yeah.
Plunging my foot, thank you.
Okay, but thank you.
Sure.
Thank you, Maggie.
Thank you very much.
Thank
you.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you, Maggie.
Very good session.
Next week,
Thank
Excellent.
you.
This is very strange to
Maggie.
me.
Good to
Speaking
see
into
you.
silence. I don't like this. So, see you next
What
week.
did you say
Yeah.
next?
Bye, Maggie.
Next week.
Thank you, Maggie.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.